One of the most typical phrases parents say to their kids is never talk to strangers. This is not something parents just say to keep their children safe, but is the result of legitimate fears that something might happen. Though many strangers have the best intentions at heart, some people committed acts so wicked that they live up to the nightmarish stories parents tell their children.
Bus carrying the youngsters and driver from the summer school session at Dairyland Unified School was found empty in a bamboo-covered area of the dry Berenda Slough. There is no doubt the bus was deliberately hidden in the thicket, and dust on the seats indicated the 26 youngsters were not aboard when the bus was driven into the slough. The mysterious disappearance would also indicate that at least
Welcome to another Cracked Crime Facts video. Today, we're going to be covering a shocking story that will make you hold on to your loved ones tighter than usual. Now, let's get into it. It is one of the largest mass abductions in U.S. history. 3 masked gunmen hijacked a bus with 26 children on board on July 15, 1976. The kidnappers brought the kids and the bus driver to a rock quarry in Livermore, California, 160 miles from the place where they were kidnapped. The children and the bus driver were held captive 12 feet underground in a buried box truck. It was the summer of 1976. A bus pulled into the small town of Chowchilla, California. Inside the bus were 26 traumatized children. These kids had been through an unbelievable ordeal, kidnapped and held captive in an old box truck that had been buried in a rock quarry. The school bus driver, Frank Edward, also known as Edwas, was born in La Grande, California on February 26, 1921. His parents, Frank Sr. and Mary Ray, were a young couple when they moved to Chowchilla, a small town in Central California. The couple wanted their son Ed to grow up amongst friends and receive the best possible education that their family could afford. Ed graduated from Chowchilla High School in 1940, and a few years later, Ed chose to purchase a nearby farm. On his farm, he started to grow crops like corn and raise cows and other farm animals. And although Ed loved his farm, he felt something was missing. Ed decided to try something new career-wise, something that would let him give back to his community. Ed became a bus driver for Chowchilla's local school, where he spent every weekday picking up children from their homes, dropping them off at Dairyland Elementary School, and driving the kids home at the end of a long school day. His schedule was remarkably consistent until one day, his life changed completely. On the afternoon of July 15, 1976, Ed was driving his regular path to drop the students off at their homes. On this second to last day of summer, Ed was driving 19 girls and 7 boys in the California heat. As Ed navigated down the familiar roads of Chowchilla, coming to the first of his intended stops on his way, he saw something peculiar. A white van stopped in the middle of the road just ahead of the bus. As Ed approached the van, he saw that there was another white van nearby. It seemed that the one in the middle of the road was having some difficulties or was stuck, and thus blocking traffic. Ed, being the ever-helpful man he was, pulled over to a stop just in front of the van and looked around for its owner to see if they were having engine trouble. He noticed 3 men simultaneously exiting the van in front of him. Ed felt sick to his stomach almost instantly, but it was all too late. The 3 men each held guns in their hands. With his hands raised, Ed moved out of the way so that one of the gunmen could take the steering wheel of the bus. He began to drive as the other 2 men patrolled the bus. Ed was immediately aware that he and the 26 children in his company were suddenly in a very dangerous situation. Some of the children were not even old enough to understand what was going on. Ed and the 26 children found themselves being driven to an unknown destination for 11 long hours with no bathroom breaks. By the time it was 3:30 in the morning, Ed and the children had been to a Livermore quarry, nearly 100 miles from Chowchilla. He found out that there was a box truck beneath them, a box truck that had been buried 12 feet under the ground. Ed suddenly realized that he and the children were going to be put into the truck, and they would be buried alive. Ed looked around at the children, noticing their frightened faces, and something peculiar occurred. The oldest boy of the group, 14-year-old Mike Marshall, stood up unexpectedly and said he would not die without at least testing to get out. Ed, filled with a newfound purpose, talked to Mike about a possible escape and had the older boys help out as they planned how they should go about it. The older boys and Ed collected all the mattresses that were put in the box truck. They started to stack them on top until the stack of mattresses was tall enough for someone to stand on top and reach the roof. Despite all of their attempts and efforts, it was clear that they really were trapped for good. Besides the horror of being kidnapped and buried underground, the roof of the truck had begun to gradually collapse on them. In an almost unbelievable turn of events, Ed and the boys could push open a piece of the roof and watched as some of the dirt piled on top of the van spilled off the roof. Ed lifted the children one by one out through the hole in the truck's roof. Once the children were out of the van, the older boys helped to pull Ed out. Just like that, the children of the Chowchilla kidnapping climbed out of the truck that they had just been locked up in for nearly 16 hours. The kidnapping had been carefully planned in detail for a year and a half. The kidnappers actually had a written plan, which described how they were going to commit the kidnapping. They were going to ask for $5 million from the state of California. Still, the kidnappers could never deliver their demand. When they tried to call the Chowchilla Police Department, they couldn't get through because of the number of calls coming in worldwide. The phone lines were jammed, so they decided to wait and take a nap. And when they woke up, they realized on the news that the kids had freed themselves. The quarry owner's son quickly came under suspicion as one of the people who had keys to the quarry and enough access to have buried the box truck there. He and two of his friends had previously been convicted of motor vehicle theft, for which they had been sentenced to probation. The police recovered one of the guns used in the kidnapping as well as a draft of a ransom note, but the three men had fled. Two of the kidnappers were caught 2 weeks after the kidnapping, while the third kidnapper had voluntarily turned himself in to authorities 8 days after the kidnapping. All three perpetrators pleaded guilty to kidnapping for ransom and robbery, and they were eventually sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. All three kidnappers are still alive, and one was released in 2012, followed by another one in 2015. The third and last kidnapper is still in prison. Thank you for watching, and until next time.
About 7 o'clock, we got dug out. We handed all the kids up. I handed the kids up to the other boys, and we got out. And just lucky enough, there was a gravel pit right just within 200 feet of us, and the man over there, so jumped him, told him what happened. And well, he said, I heard that on the news, so he went and called the sheriff and the fire trucks and everything else was there. So we had a big crowd. We all got home safe. That's my story, I guess.